Elizabeth Cady Stanton, a pioneer of women's rights. Elizabeth Cady Stanton was a trailblazing feminist, suffragist, and women's rights advocate whose tireless efforts in the 19th century paved the way for women's rights and social equality in the United States. Born on November 12, 1815, in Johnstown, New York, she grew up in a society where women had limited rights and opportunities. However, throughout her life, Stanton challenged these societal norms and dedicated herself to the cause of women's rights. Early life and education. Stanton was born into a privileged family with a strong tradition of progressive thinking. Her father, Daniel Cady, was a prominent attorney and judge, and her mother, Margaret Livingston Cady, came from a family known for their commitment to women's education. This upbringing instilled in her a sense of justice and a desire to advocate for change. Stanton's education was unusual for a girl of her time. Her father encouraged her to study subjects typically reserved for boys, such as mathematics and philosophy. Her education at Johnstown Academy and Emma Willard's Troy Female Seminary, now known as the Emma Willard School, laid the intellectual foundation for her future activism. In 1840, Elizabeth Cady Stanton married Henry Brewster Stanton, an abolitionist and prominent speaker. Their marriage was a partnership based on shared values and mutual respect, which was quite unusual for the era. They settled in Seneca Falls, New York, and started a family that eventually included 7 children. The Seneca Falls Convention. Stanton's involvement in the women's rights movement began in earnest in 1848 when she, along with Lucretia Mott and several other like-minded women, organized the Seneca Falls Convention. This historic event marked the official beginning of the women's suffrage movement in the United States. At the Seneca Falls Convention, Stanton delivered the Declaration of Sentiments, a document modeled after the Declaration of Independence. It called for equal rights for women, including the right to vote. The convention's resolution on women's suffrage was considered radical at the time, but it set the stage for future activism. Partnership with Susan B. Anthony. One of the most significant partnerships in Stanton's life was with Susan B. Anthony, another prominent women's rights activist. Stanton and Anthony worked closely together for over 5 decades, complementing each other's strengths and strategies. Stanton was the visionary thinker and eloquent writer, while Anthony was a skilled organizer and speaker. Stanton's writings and speeches. Throughout her life, Stanton authored numerous writings advocating for women's rights and gender equality. Her book, The Woman's Bible, challenged traditional religious interpretations that supported the subjugation of women. Stanton's speeches and essays often combined eloquent rhetoric with sharp criticism of the unequal treatment of women in society. Championing women's suffrage. Stanton's dedication to women's suffrage was unwavering. She co-founded the National Woman Suffrage Association, NWSA, in 1869, which aimed to secure voting rights for women at the federal level. Stanton served as the NWSA's first president and played a key role in advocating for a constitutional amendment to grant women the right to vote. Challenges and opposition. Stanton's advocacy for women's rights faced considerable opposition. Many suffrage activists were also involved in the abolitionist movement, but Stanton and Anthony's approach often put them at odds with other activists who prioritized the abolition of slavery over women's rights. Their outspokenness on issues such as divorce reform and more radical demands, like women's right to control their bodies and sexuality, also created controversy. Elizabeth Cady Stanton's tireless efforts contributed significantly to the eventual success of the women's suffrage movement. The 19th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which granted women the right to vote, was ratified in 1920. Long after Stanton's death in 1902. Stanton did not live to see this victory, but her work laid the foundation for future generations of women to claim their rights as equal citizens. Stanton's legacy extends beyond suffrage. Her advocacy for women's rights challenged societal norms and continues to inspire feminist movements worldwide. She is remembered as a fearless trailblazer who dedicated her life to achieving justice and equality for women, leaving an indelible mark on the history of women's rights in the United States.